Since February 28, 2026, the U.S. has fired hundreds of Patriot interceptors, each costing millions of dollars, against Iranian drones and missiles over the Middle East. Iran has launched over 585 ballistic missiles and more than 1,500 drones in under 2 weeks. The Patriot system has performed well technically. Interception rates are near 100% against Iranian salvos. By every technical measure, it is working, and it is still losing the war of math. A U.S. senator put it plainly during a briefing this month. The rounds being fired, Patriot rounds and THAAD rounds, each one costs millions of dollars. The math on this does not work. This video explains exactly why that math does not work, and what it means for every conflict that comes after this one. To understand why the Patriot is struggling, you first need to understand what it was designed for, because it was genuinely excellent at that job. The Patriot was developed during the Cold War with one primary mission: intercept Soviet ballistic missiles. Fast, high altitude, predictable flight paths, singular threats coming from a known direction. That is the scenario it was optimized for. And for decades, that made strategic sense. The assumption was that air defense was a deterrent, that an adversary knowing a Patriot battery was present simply would not attack. The system was never meant to fight its way through a sustained campaign of thousands of cheap munitions. The Patriot was perfectly designed for a war that never happened. It is now fighting a war it was not. The first technical problem is coverage. The Patriot's radar is powerful but narrow. It focuses in one direction at a time. In a conflict where ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drone swarms arrive simultaneously from multiple directions, a single battery cannot track everything at once. You have to make a choice about what to shoot at. What you do not shoot at gets through. The second problem is cost asymmetry, and this is the one that is breaking the system right now in real time. Each Shahed 136 drone costs approximately $35,000. Each PAC-3 interceptor missile costs approximately $4 million. That is a 100-to-1 cost ratio. Iran does not need to destroy the Patriot. It just needs to make it shoot. In just the first 6 days of this conflict, the United States spent an estimated $11 billion in munitions. Between 100 and 200 THAAD interceptors were fired. 80 SM-3s were fired, and significant numbers of Patriot missiles on top of that. To put that in perspective, the United States produced roughly 320 Tomahawk cruise missiles over the previous 5 years. In 6 days of this conflict, 168 were fired. The Navy will be feeling that for years. The third problem is production speed. A PAC-3 missile takes approximately 2 years to manufacture from order to delivery. Lockheed Martin is ramping production, but it cannot ramp fast enough to replace what is being consumed right now in this conflict this week. The just-in-time production model that works for commercial supply chains is a critical vulnerability when applied to weapons of war. Here is the second half of the problem, and in some ways it is more serious than the technical one. The Patriot is not deployed in one conflict zone. It is simultaneously covering NATO, Europe, South Korea, Japan, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and now the active theater of this conflict. Every nation watching what is happening right now is running the same calculation. If this is what a high-tempo campaign costs in interceptors, how long can we sustain our own defense? THAAD batteries are being physically moved from South Korea to the Middle East to support this operation, which means Seoul now has reduced coverage against North Korea. That is the definition of strategic overstretch. You are robbing one defensive commitment to fund another. And unlike budget dollars, you cannot print more interceptor missiles overnight. Iran understood this. The saturation strategy, launching more threats than can economically be intercepted, was not improvised. It was designed specifically to exploit the cost asymmetry and force the defender to exhaust itself. Iran has been firing drones at a pace of 4,000 to 5,000 Shahed munitions per month, comparable to Russia's sustained campaign against Ukraine. Against that volume, even near-perfect interception rates drain stockpiles faster than industry can replace them. The math does not work. So what is actually being done about this? The Pentagon has signaled it will request an additional $50 billion from Congress, partly to replenish what has been expended, and partly to accelerate a fundamentally different class of solution. Directed energy weapons, high-powered lasers, and microwave systems are being fast-tracked precisely because they solve the cost equation. A laser has a near zero cost per shot. You cannot run out of it the way you run out of a $4 million interceptor. Several systems are already in limited deployment, but none are at the scale needed to absorb the volume of threats being generated right now. The U.S. military is also accelerating its low-cost uncrewed combat attack system known as Lucas, designed to counter cheap drones with cheap countermeasures rather than expensive interceptors. Fight the threat at its own cost level, not yours. The Patriot is not obsolete, but it was never designed to be the only answer. It is being used as one because nothing cheaper and equally capable exists yet at scale. What this conflict has exposed is not a failure of technology. The Patriot is hitting what it aims at. What it has exposed is a failure of industrial planning, decades of underinvestment in production capacity for the exact scenario now unfolding. The lesson is not that the Patriot failed. The lesson is that winning tactically while losing economically is still losing. We covered how AR defense missile stockpiles were already running low before this conflict even started. That video is linked in the description, and you can watch it next if you want the full picture. Subscribe for weekly breakdowns of what is actually happening in modern warfare, not just what the headlines say. See you in the next one.